There are a lot of different studies that are just starting. This is just the beginning, just the tip of the iceberg, looking at neuroprotective effects, looking at anti-cancer effects, looking at anti-inflammatory effects, liver protective effects, all different types of studies.
Hello, podcast listeners. You are now watching and listening to the Health First Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. With me, as always, is Chief Learning Officer from Purity Coffee, Ildi Revy. How's it going, Ildi?
Going awesome.
Thank you for being here. And today's guest, I am very, very excited to introduce. He's a first-time guest on this show. He is a food science professor at North Carolina State University. He's an expert on functional food science, on nutraceuticals, and he's also an expert in today's topic, diterpenes in coffee. Very excited to introduce on the show, Dr. Gabriel Harris. How's it going, Dr. Harris?
Great. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on. We're super excited to speak to you. Ildi saw one of your presentations, and so we just had to talk to you on the show. Let's dive right into today's topic, diterpenes, terpenes, and coffee and health. So Dr. Harris, first, can you give a brief explanation of what terpenes are, and then what differentiates diterpenes specifically, and what these compounds do in nature?
Sure. Yeah. So maybe to get started, I thought the best way to think of this is Legos. So as a parent, I have stepped on plenty of Legos in the dark and, had all those fun experiences. But Legos are great because you start with very small pieces and you build them into potentially amazing structures. So diterpenes, really where we begin is isoprenoids. So isoprenoids are 5 carbon units that we then put together into 10 carbon units, and that is a terpene. So we start with very small pieces, like Legos, and we start building. And so the terpenes themselves are going to be these 10 carbon units, as I said, and they would include things that we would consider to be essential oils. So when we think of things that have wonderful aromas, pinene, limonene, linalool, so those would be from, of course, pine and from lemons or citrus. And then that last one is lavender. So all lovely aromas and scents. For plants, though, it's not just an aroma, but very often it's a defense compound. So plants start building from very small structures, these 5 carbon units, to make larger ones, 10 carbons in this case. Some of those terpenes then have their own health effects, in addition to the wonderful flavors that they communicate and the aromas that they communicate. So that's kind of an overview of terpenes. Nature loves to build from small to large pieces, much like my kids and, of course, myself love to build with Legos.
That is so interesting. So these are heavy, powerful aromatic compounds that exist all over in nature.
Yes. Yeah. So the bigger they get, right, when they're small, like those terpenes, we smell them. But the bigger they get, the less likely we are to smell them, and the more likely they are to be present in our food as something that we would consider more of an oily material that we could sort of detect in terms of a feel, but not in terms of an aroma to a great degree.
Got it. So in lay person's term, maybe the diterpenes are a little bit heavier, a little bit more stable, that sort of thing?
Yes. So like it sounds, when we go from terpenes, which is 10 carbons, to diterpenes, we go from 10 to 20. So we're putting twice as many carbons into those diterpenes, and that's where that name comes from. And so what happens is then they become part of this lipid fraction, more of what you would think of as an oil versus something that we would think of as kind of an essential oil or an aroma. So that's kind of what happens when you move from 10 to 20. They become a lot less likely to volatilize, and therefore we don't really smell them as much.
Fascinating.
I love that you mentioned the lipid fraction, because that's where the mouthfeel of coffee comes in.
Oh my gosh. So that makes a lot of sense. What you're chewing on there is actually, this oil fraction that's made up of a lot of things, including diterpenes.
Right. So we have, as every lab does, we have kind of minor differences of opinion. In my opinion, pour overs are the best kind of coffee that you can make. Other members of my lab, who shall remain nameless, think French press is the best kind of coffee you can make. And for them, part of it is what we call that mouth feel, or that feeling of those oils that come through in an unfiltered method. So French press, you end up with a cup of coffee that contains not only all the materials in that you'd find in filtered coffee, but also essential oils and other things that you can literally feel on your tongue. And you can see them. You can look at the coffee and see like a little rainbow kind of on top, as you would, see maybe a rainbow if there was a little bit of oil on top of water. So you can literally see that occurring. And I'd say that as opposed to my pour over, which I love, that is a filtered method, and those diterpenes are essentially absent. So they're gone. It doesn't have that kind of a mouthfeel that you would experience with a French press. And thus this is our minor controversy in the lab, right? I like the pour over, and the others, I guess, for that texture mouthfeel characteristic, like the French press.
That is so fascinating. And listen, we love to get into the nitty gritty here. So that's right up our alley.
Cool.
And so if I love the French press over a pour over, that means that I'm a big fan of that oil layer, of that diterpene fraction, of all of that, is what you're saying.
Right, that's part of the experience. There may be other things that say the filters could be removing from that flavor wise, but generally speaking, yes, you're removing that lipid or oil fraction by using a filter. By using a non-filtered method like French press, you're keeping those materials in the coffee. And if you like that, that's probably part of what you enjoy about that particular type of coffee.
Oh, I love that. So when it comes to diterpenes in coffee, then how else do they influence the experience? Like you said, mouthfeel, but also, are there specific diterpene compounds that relay specific flavors, kind of like you were saying about the linalool and the lavender?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is something that is just starting to be investigated. So the major diterpenes, and we're probably going to come back to those from a health perspective, but the major diterpenes would be ortho methylcafestol, cafestol, and kawiol. So those are the three major ones. To this point, and of course, that may be the next scientific paper coming out, but up to this point, they don't seem to contribute in a major way to flavor or aroma. But there are other diterpenes. Diterpenes are a really diverse group, as I said, 20 carbons, but within that 20 carbon range, there are a lot of different little things that you can put together, right? Kind of back to our Lego example. Some of those have been shown to have some aroma active characteristics, and in general, those aroma active characteristics not for cafestols and kawiol, but those other compounds, which are much more rare, seem to have the ability to actually reduce the cupping score of specialty coffee. So those would be less desirable in a coffee overall.
From a health perspective, all those compounds you just mentioned, are they generally healthy for us? Are they generally unhealthy? Are they healthy for some? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I think with most health-related aspects, especially when you're talking about a food like coffee, there are typically some things that are potentially beneficial, and typically some which may be less beneficial. So if we kind of start with what's more well-known and more well-studied, the diterpenes, that orthomethyl, cafestol, and kawiol, those three, what they tend to do, if you are a heavy consumer of unfiltered coffee, that could be a French press, and also if you're in the Norwegian countries, could be boiled coffee, which is very popular there as well. Espresso to a lesser extent. All of those have those oils present to different degrees. And in general, what that can do is raise triglycerides and LDL. So what we would view as the less healthy form of cholesterol in coffee drinkers, especially if you're drinking a lot of that over the course of a day. So that's one side of the picture. The question of whether this is good or not good is dependent on what are your cholesterol levels, right? Some individuals have very low cholesterol, some have very high. It really depends. So I think part of that is kind of a discussion with your physician. On the other side, there are a lot of different studies that are just starting. This is just the beginning, just the tip of the iceberg, looking at neuroprotective effects, looking at anti-cancer effects, looking at anti-inflammatory effects, liver protective effects, all different types of studies. But most of these studies are being done in cell culture. This is with isolated cells of different types or with animal models. And I think this is sort of where the opportunities are, is to try to understand what those potential effects would be on humans. Is there an anti-inflammatory effect that would be beneficial here? Very few human studies. The one that I did see was looking at the effects of these compounds on waist circumference, and there did appear to be some effect on body fat. But when you have one clinical study, that means it's one clinical study. You need multiple studies pointing in the same direction, really, to be able to make a strong statement. And that's whether I do the clinical study or somebody else does the clinical study. We need multiple studies saying the same thing to really be confident about that. And I guess the other side of this that I thought was very interesting was cosmetics. So I didn't really think about this until I started doing a little bit more research, but there does appear to be some benefit in terms of skin moisturizing. So there's another whole area of what we would call cosmeceuticals, meaning natural products that potentially could be of benefit in that cosmetics realm. So there's a lot of exciting things going on. I think on that positive side, a lot of it is yet to really be fully unveiled for human health anyway.
I just love talking to professors like you because you're living right in that world that we talk about here, Dr. Harris, which is like, it's so hard to nail down what does this thing do. You understand this better than anybody. Such a complex brew such as coffee, and then the complexity of human biology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're really getting into the nitty gritty, and it must make it hard to study. Like, forget that single compound. What about the entourage effect and the interaction between all of these compounds and unique individuals? Is there ever enough research? Will the debate ever be settled on something like this? Or is it just the journey is the destination? You know what I mean?
Well, I think one thing to think about first is humility. So the human body is incredibly complex. Every human is different from every other human. Plants, and if we just want to focus on coffee, plants and coffee in particular, very complex, depending on where it's grown, how did you roast it, how did you brew it. So these are all the complexities that come in. I think what it should give us is a real sense of humility in terms of what we actually know. But what in my mind happens is that turns over to a sense of real interest, because we're just exploring. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. We're just finding out all this cool stuff. So to me, this is a very exciting time to be involved in coffee related research because of how little we know. And then, as I said, to be confident about any of these things, again, kind of approaching that with humility, we need to not only run studies in our lab, but we need to work with other labs and ask the question, are all of these different studies pointing in the same direction? If so, then maybe we can make a statement to say, okay, I think this type of coffee brewed in this way is going to have this potential health-related benefit. So I think that's really the work that needs to be done. And to me, I'm just excited to be at that stage where we have some great questions. We just need to get in there and start doing the work.
I've heard a lot about diterpenes and liver health. Could you speak just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the hepatoprotective or liver protective effects of those diterpenes specifically, I don't think the science is fully settled yet. I think most of the data is really coming from cell culture in these areas. I think that means that, oh, maybe there's a potential benefit. Maybe that means that we need to run studies to ask this question. I think there are certainly other compounds in coffee, and Jordan, you mentioned caffeine, certainly a compound that I appreciate greatly. There are effects of, say, caffeine on how quickly our liver processes a lot of the materials that we are consuming every day. So our liver does so much of the work of consuming, of really converting whatever we're taking in to things that are less toxic and then getting rid of it. And it doesn't know. You don't tell it ahead of time what it is that you're going to be eating or drinking. It's just dealing with all of these things. It's such an amazing organ. So to me, the fact that caffeine, we know that caffeine can speed up some of the things that are happening in the liver that actually may have some benefits in some cases. So I think, that in my mind, the answer is, let's continue to study this very complex food, which is coffee, and ask questions about what are these kind of, you mentioned before, Jordan, global effects, right? So we have very complex system, human, very complex beverage, coffee. What's happening when these very complex things are interacting with one another? That's a great area for study to me, and that's very exciting.
I do a show on it, Dr. Harris. It's really
Nice.
amazing that you can produce a whole podcast on it. On the subject of study, though, what does the future hold? So, like, if you had to extrapolate out, let's just say that, what you're working on now, what you're theorizing now proves out, what does that mean for the future of this incredible field of study?
Yeah, so I think that what we try to do is we try to say, okay, well, what are the potential positive leads here that we could follow? And so one of those things would be, we could say, oh, well, in cells there appears to be some hepatoprotective effect. Can we move this to another model? That would typically be an animal model next, and then from there, if that works, could we use this in some kind of human trial? So I think what we do is kind of much like a reporter, you follow leads, right? So you say, oh, this looks really promising. Let's follow that. So in my mind, I think personally, I'm interested in that intersection of food, not only food and flavor, but also food and health. So we're interested in how, say, coffee might affect blood sugar, how coffee might affect athletic performance, or how it might affect anxiety and mental health issues. So we're interested in all these areas, and we're not focusing as much on a single set of compounds. We're focusing on coffee and trying to understand how this very complex thing affects humans in ways that may be beneficial. So those are some of the things that we're interested in. And as I said, it just really piqued my interest when I saw that there's some cosmetic effect as well. That's kind of a cool thing to me.
Something that I would love to see in science is, as they study coffee, is to have certain type of coffee that is studied, or certain things that are known to not be in the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Because these large human studies, like the UK Biobank, where they have 500,000 data on 500,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and they drank coffee. They drank everything from instant coffee that was mixed with sugar and creamer, when they drank it, through specialty, espresso or Turkish coffee. They just asked, did you drink coffee? So, and then we never know what quality of coffee it was. The goal of my company is to try and find the healthiest coffees that nature can produce various ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we define that? And of course, we need to study these compounds and the levels of these compounds, but it's sort of a chicken and an egg. So how do you reconcile that?
So I think, and again, here we go. We're going to dive right into the weeds. So one of the things that we would do for a particular study is we would very carefully define what coffee we sourced. We would very carefully define how that coffee is roasted. We would define exactly what type of filter we're using, if we're going to use a filtered method or not, or non-filtered method, exactly how we make it. What's our water temperature? How much ground coffee is mixed with how much water? What's the particle size? So we would go really into the weeds, and the reason is that we want to be able to say, this is exactly the coffee that was delivered to this particular group. Now, the reason we do that in the lab or in a clinical study is basically so that we can control everything to the greatest extent possible. We would then chemically analyze what is in that coffee that we very, very carefully made and gave to our participants so that we know chemically what's there, how exactly we made it, and then what were the effects on those individuals that we work with. So that's a very careful control. Clinical studies are great from that perspective. They're very intensive, and they're also quite expensive. When you go to kind of backing up and doing survey data, some epidemiological study like that European data, where you're just saying, do you drink coffee? How many cups a day do you drink? And it's not specific at all, not asking a lot of these very specific questions. I think, that in the future, what we're going to be able to do is more successfully combine those different types of data. So the idea of being able to put those things together, and this may be, of course, everybody's talking about this kind of thing. This may be a good use of AI. The idea of we're going to combine data that's just survey based. It's very kind of big picture. And we're going to take that data and put it together with things that are, say, clinical trial based, working directly with humans, controlling everything we can, and cell data and animal data and all these other parts. I think this may be a way that AI can be leveraged to kind of ask questions, and it may come up with potential ideas that we didn't really think about because we're not able to keep all these data points in our mind all at the same time. At least I can't. I'm just speaking for myself here. So I think that may be something, again, in the future where we'll be able to leverage all of these studies that we've been doing and be able to get more definitive information about how coffee could be used for health or just enjoyment. What's the best way to the best cup of coffee, right? Just enjoyment is another great thing to have with coffee, of course.
Really great question, Ildi. And it's a very good point, because if, like you said, you're dealing with these two complex universes smashing into each other, it occurs to me that at the very least, if you could standardize one of the factors, you're never going to standardize human biology, right? That's the whole point of research. But if we can standardize the coffee at least, then we can start to get a grasp on what's occurring.
Exactly. Yeah.
What other tips do you have for health first coffee consumers, people who are looking to get the most out of their cup and are shopping for more than just, hey, this tastes good, looking for a healthy cup?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess one thing is just understanding your own kind of health and area of and interest in health, exercise, things of this nature. So that's one of our areas of interest. How much coffee, for example, would you want to consume if you want to go on a run, or you want to go to the gym? You're using coffee as a pre-workout. So I think these are really important questions. And I just remember having this conversation. It was a huge meeting, and the question was presented to military researchers. Okay, if you want to have soldiers on patrol, and you're trying to give, in this case, they were using caffeinated sticks of gum, right? So not even coffee, but like we know exactly how much caffeine is in this stick of gum. How many of those do you need to give to soldiers in order to have them effectively patrol, for a night? They couldn't answer the question. Humans are so complex, right, that they couldn't answer that question. So I think it was interesting to me, it kind of made me think, oh, well, we need to do more research in this area, which seems pretty straightforward. How many milligrams of caffeine do I need if I want to stay up all night in general? This may be quite beneficial to my students who are getting ready for final exams, right? So if I want to pull an all-nighter, how much caffeine do I need to consume, for example? So I think that these are some questions that I think would be interesting to try to look into, try to answer in the future.
I love it, Dr. Harris. This was an amazing interview.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris.
Ildi, thank you for the opportunity, and Jordan, thank you for the invite. This was great. Absolutely loved it. Thank you.
Where can people find out more about you and your work? We would love to give plugs and promos for you.
Okay, well, I'm at NC State University, so certainly you can look me up. I'm in the Department of Food, Bioprocessing, and Nutrition Sciences. Very long departmental name, which is why we usually say FBNS, but great place to work and wonderful people to work with. So that's one place. Certainly, you can look me up on LinkedIn as well. And then I'll say, if you're interested in the food science related aspects of what we do, you can look up our podcast, which is Wolfing Down Food Science. So any of those places, you can find us. And yeah, really looking forward to interacting. If anybody has any follow-up questions, I would love to talk with you. And I can provide my email. So if anybody wants to reach out, happy to talk with them about this stuff.
Awesome. We'll drop that in the description below. Dr. Harris, this is
Cool.
a wonderful episode. Thank you again so much. Thank you, Ildi. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in, dear listener. We'll see you next time. This is Jordan River, Ildi Revy, and Dr. Gabriel Harris signing off, saying have an extraordinary rest of your day, and we'll see you next time on the Health First Coffee Podcast. Bye-bye, everybody.